For Houston, from Houston, this is the Jimmy Barrett Show on KTRH 950.
Feels like we've been talking about trucking driver shortage, I want to say like for the last 10 years, maybe more. And I don't know why that is, because I think it's been a fairly well-publicized fact that you can make a pretty doggone good living driving trucks. That's for sure. Now, I'm guessing maybe part of it has to do with the schedule that you keep. I'm thinking long-haul truckers are always tougher to hire than short-haul truckers, or people are just doing it as a day job in their home every night. And I know more companies have kind of embraced the idea of trying to make that possible for as many drivers as they can. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, there are things that have to get hauled from coast to coast. You can't do that in a day. Joining us to talk about it is trucking industry expert Jim Grundy. He's the CEO and owner of Sisu Energy LLC. How many trucks do you have at your place, Jim?
Oh, we got a few hundred.
Is that all?
That's all.
Wow.
Well, we've been in business for about 16, 17 months now, so we're a fairly new company. And we opened up right before the pandemic. The easy thing would have been to, shut our doors and walk away when February, March of 2020. But instead, something interesting happened. We opened the doors of transparency with our team, our internal team, and with our drivers that run for us. Told them what was coming. Put everything on the table, as far as expectations, and instead of everybody running away and anchoring down, we kind of banded together, and we came in 2020 very strong. When we left 2020, where we're at now, we are now probably the biggest pneumatic bulk carrier in Texas.
Dang.
And that's because of the people and the processes that we put in place during 2020.
That's fantastic. Congratulations on that. And the industry itself, I would think the opportunity there with the pandemic was for everybody in the trucking industry to grow, because everybody's getting everything delivered these days.
Yeah, so, there's two different types of, that's called final mile delivery. So anything that going to your house or going to the end destination, that's called final mile. But the biggest part of trucking that's been depleted and kind of what you referenced when you started the segment, when the pandemic shut down manufacturing globally, and all these companies were told to go home, and we're talking about your mom and pop restaurants, right? They get their product via truckers. They didn't just shut down that company. They shut down that truck driver delivering that product to that company. And what happened was in 2020, they estimate 40 to 50% of all truckers left the industry in 2020.
Wow.
Well, as the economy recovers, what's happening is those truckers are not coming back. Rightfully so. Can they trust it? Can they pay for their family, their bills and their food? It's very, are we out of the pandemic yet? We're not. And so what's happened is some of these companies have yet to come back online. Truckers aren't coming back, and now there's a massive shortage, and the supply chains are being disruptive, not just here in the States, but you're talking globally, North America. There's shelves that are empty, and even in our space, we have guys making up to $15,000 a week in gross revenue, and that's an incredible number. That's well over $600,000 a year, extrapolated out over 52 weeks. Yet we can't find enough drivers to do it.
Wow. Maybe if more of them knew they could be making that kind of money, maybe you'd find more drivers. But I understand what you're saying, because a lot of industries have that. There are ups and downs in every industry, and construction comes to mind, for example. And it's going to be interesting to see here. We're still in a bit of a boom right now because the interest rates are so low. But it's going to be interesting to see when interest rates start to rise, what happens with the housing industry and what happens to the people who build homes, and I'm talking about the people on site, the carpenters, the electricians, all those types of individuals, because those are great places to make a living when building times are good. But when they aren't, and those people get laid off, then they have a tendency to go from that industry into something else. I can see where that would be the same with trucking.
Yeah, one of the more surprising things about the trucking industry is the rate, the pay of the driver. Since the mid '80s, it hasn't increased a single percentage point. right? So that back then in the 80s and the 90s, and what you're seeing is a very aged workforce behind the truck driver. People have looked down upon the truck driver for whatever reason, yet these guys are making anywhere from $250,000 to $500,000 a year, which is more than most of your hedge fund managers out there right now on Wall Street. Yet, for whatever reason, we look down upon truck drivers, and our guys that run for Sisu Energy out in West Texas, the supporting the oil and gas industry in itself, they do sleep in a bed every night. They're not going coast to coast. There's very localized, marginalized, right? They might run 300 miles a day, and yet they're yielding $2,000 to $3,000 in revenue a day.
Yeah.
So those incredible opportunities are out there, and our goal was to let people know that, hey, there's safe companies out there that endured the pandemic. They're standing here now. We're one of them. We're a wonderful company built on smart technologies. We've got amazing people, and the opportunity now to strike we're in the middle of it.
If you could
this
find
ramp up that you referenced it.
I was going to say, if you could find great qualified people, how many openings would you have right now, Jim Grundy? How many truckers could you hire?
Oh, I mean, and this is not being facetious. I could probably do 700 to 1,000 more this second.
Holy moly! Wow.
Yeah. Well, that's easy. I mean, you're talking about the demand for our services because of how we performed in 2020 during the pandemic. And we're still in it now, but what we're doing from a platform and a service quality perspective is, I don't think, being matched by anybody down here in Southwest U.S. It's just not happening, which is why we're growing at a clip we're growing at, and demand for our services. We have companies calling us now, asking us to run for them because of the quality and the service that we're providing. And so that's a really unique thing, and we're in a really strange position where it's the scalability it's just a matter of getting folks secure and comfortable from a mental standpoint to come back out of their homes and do it. Now we cater to owner-operators. That's our game, right? We don't have any company assets. So what we do is we find that independent contractor out there. They come into our portfolio, leverage our buying power and our negotiating strength, and that's how they're able to do all this stuff.
How concerned? You're in the energy industry. Obviously, a lot of your truckers, work for basically for energy companies. How concerned are you about this particular administration and what you see potentially coming, and the push towards electric and the possibility of whatever they come up with for taxes on whether we're talking about mileage taxes or if we're talking about additional taxes on fuel? Those are things that impact your industry directly.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a great question. So it is concerning. I believe yesterday we just endured a 7% corporate tax rate increase from 21 to 28%. And we think, okay, well, who's paying for that? Well, it's companies like us that are employing these people, and now you're taking 7% away from us. So this major $1 trillion rollout they did, it wasn't free, right? Someone's going to pay for it. So here we are on the backside of this, and when you consider, like they've talked about putting a ban on fracking on federal lands, and what's the first thing that happened? Well, the oil price is now at $60, and it's rising day over day. So who pays for that? Well, it's all of us. It's all the end users and the consumers of oil and gas and gasoline, right? So it's just like they're making policies, and what we consider they're just shooting themselves in the foot. But when you continue adding restrictions, and you're taxing the public, and you're taxing businesses, and you're adding more and more federal restrictions, essentially what you're doing is you're limiting supply. The demand's rising, and you're going to increase the cost of goods across the board. And I don't think that's the intent, or maybe it is, but it's. I don't think it's very strategic, and I don't think it's very macro perspective.
Well, and looking down the road, too, if the goal here is to go electric, from a practical standpoint, could you even if they wanted to, could you build an all-electric 18-wheeler capable of hauling the kinds of loads y'all haul?
No, I think those already exist. There's already 18-wheelers that are all electric, but those are really for over-the-road in a very sustained environment on sustained roads. What we do in the oil and gas industry, and look, we also run Amazon Freight. We do JB Hunt over the road, and we have a whole division of that. But the majority of what we do is oil and gas, and you're turning down a lease road that is unpaved, right? That's got substantial potholes, and there's not a lot of infrastructure and where we're at out there when we're doing these fracturing type services. So no, would an electric vehicle do well? No, because sometimes things happen, and those trucks can get stranded. So you're talking about you're only as good as the shelf life of that lithium battery. When that runs out, what do?
Well,
so
and that's the
being on a highway. Yeah, being on a highway that's got infrastructure, it would work. But you're talking, we're decades away from doing anything like that, and it creates a great narrative. And we talked about the big Green New Deal, and there's nothing that you're just going to replace from a cost perspective, natural gas and oil. It's not going to happen, not anytime soon.
But my suspicion is, not to get overly political here, Jim, but my suspicion is that we will eventually end up with a mileage tax and a gas tax, and electric tax, in order to be able to pay for these programs, because they're going to have to find a way to tax everybody. And I think they will penalize diesel vehicles that run on diesel. They will penalize those of us who still want to drive an internal combustion engine SUV versus driving electric, and they will get it to the point where it'll be cheaper to get an electric vehicle than it will be to drive a gas vehicle. But the only way to get there is through higher taxes.
And you know what's amazing about that is that's what's happening over on the diesel side of the world already. The reason why so many independent contractors have left the industry and they parked the tractors is because the juice is no longer worth the squeeze, right? The amount of federal regulations. And you ever notice every time that we look to central government to blanket solve a problem for all of America, it actually winds up complicating things more and more. We've reduced the state's individuality and the power in the states, and we're using these blanket programs. And every time you hear a program, I hear taxes. Right? Here's another program. Well, here's a tax increase. And what we're doing is we're taxing the citizens of this country to death, and we're not putting an onus on creativity and business and employment. Every time when you're increasing taxes, you're saying just the opposite. You're restricting the amount of these companies' abilities to grow for the use of more programs that most end users will never touch and or see.
Well said, sir. You'd almost sound like you're a Texan.
Hey, I'm from Dallas-Fort Worth, man. I used to live down there. I used to live in Houston, though. I used to live in City Center. It's a wonderful place. I love Houston, Texas.
Well, glad you had an opportunity to visit with us today. It was very nice to meet you. Congratulations again on your success, and I'll keep my fingers crossed, as we all are, that things don't get too crazy in Washington, D.C. to ruin your perfect industry. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having us.
You bet. Jim Grundy joining us here on AM 950 KTRH. Back with more in a moment. Jimmy Barrett Show.